A queen in shadow and light. What if everything you think you know about Cleopatra is only half the truth? Imagine a queen whose story was stolen, twisted by her enemies, romanticized by poets, and distorted by centuries of rumor. What secrets would you find if you could peel back the legend and meet the real woman, a survivor, a scholar, a mother, and a ruler who changed history? This is her untold story, and it begins long before Caesar or Antony in a city of marble and sand where every day was a fight for survival. The world remembers Cleopatra as a seductress, a fatal beauty, a queen who tamed Rome's greatest men and lost her kingdom for love. She is painted on canvas and silver screen with cold, dark eyes and a cobra crown, a living myth who strides through our dreams. But in the quiet hours of night, another Cleopatra waits, a woman of fierce intelligence shaped by ambition, loss, and the shadow of a doomed dynasty. This is not just a story of power. It is the story of a world at its breaking point, where ancient gods give way to foreign armies, and every friend might become an enemy by morning. It is the story of Alexandria, the most dazzling city on earth, where Greek and Egyptian, Jew and Roman, merchant and scholar, slave and king collide beneath the gaze of the eternal sea. To understand Cleopatra, you must first see the world she inherited, a world of danger and opportunity, where a single mistake could mean death, and a single act of courage could echo for thousands of years. Chapter 1. The World Before Cleopatra. Long before Cleopatra drew her first breath, the city of Alexandria was already a legend. Founded by Alexander the Great, it was a city like no other, its shining white palaces and temples rising from the blue waters of the Mediterranean, its lighthouse a beacon to every traveler, its harbor crowded with ships from 3 continents. Here, at the edge of the known world, the richest treasures, the sharpest minds, and the boldest dreams converged. Yet behind the marble facades, Alexandria was a city of tension and intrigue. For 3 centuries, Egypt had been ruled not by native sons, but by the Greek-speaking Ptolemaic dynasty, a family as brilliant and dangerous as any in history. The Ptolemies were descended from one of Alexander's generals, and they ruled Egypt with a blend of Greek pride and Egyptian ritual, dressing as pharaohs, speaking Greek in their courts, and making offerings to both Zeus and Isis. The Ptolemaic dynasty was infamous for its internal wars, betrayals, and scandals. Brothers killed brothers, sisters poisoned sisters, and mothers conspired with sons. In Alexandria's royal palace, marble floors were washed with blood as often as with wine. Children learned early that power was the only armor worth having. By the time of Cleopatra's birth in 69 BCE, Egypt's glory was already fading. The Romans, once distant, troublesome allies, now cast long shadows over the Mediterranean. Rome demanded tribute, gold, and obedience. Its legions waited just across the sea, hungry for new conquests. Within Egypt itself, the Ptolemies had grown weaker, their court divided by factions, and their authority often ignored outside Alexandria's walls. The priesthoods remembered the days of Egyptian kings and kept their own power alive in the temples of the south. Yet the Ptolemies still possessed a magnetism and grandeur that held Egypt together. They were builders of wonders, the Library of Alexandria, home to the wisdom of the ancient world, the lighthouse, a wonder to sailors from Africa, Asia, and Europe, and festivals that lit the city in dazzling gold and blue. Even in decline, they clung to the rituals of kingship, parading as living gods, speaking the ancient words, and promising that Egypt's greatness would never die. Into this storm, Cleopatra was born. Her earliest memories would have been of marble courtyards and incense smoke, the rush of Greek voices and the low chanting of Egyptian priests. She learned to move quietly, to listen more than she spoke, and to watch the shadows, because in the royal palace nothing was as it seemed. Every sibling was a rival, every tutor a potential spy, and every game a lesson in survival. Cleopatra's education was exceptional, even by the standards of the Ptolemaic court. She was taught to read and write in Greek, Egyptian, and several other languages, a rare achievement for any royal and almost unheard of for a woman. She learned philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and poetry from the city's best teachers. She studied politics, religion, and the ancient rituals of pharaonic Egypt. She practiced public speaking, debate, and the subtle art of winning friends and outsmarting enemies. Even as a child, Cleopatra saw the cracks in her world. She watched as her father, Ptolemy XII, struggled to maintain his throne, paying huge sums to Rome for protection, facing rebellions in the countryside, and fearing betrayal from his own family. Cleopatra learned the price of power early. Trust no one blindly, keep your mind sharp, and never forget the people whose loyalty would matter most in a crisis. In Alexandria's crowded streets, Cleopatra also glimpsed the reality of her people. Most Egyptians lived lives untouched by the luxury of the court. They worshipped ancient gods in hidden shrines, toiled in the fields, and spoke a language the ruling class rarely bothered to learn. Cleopatra, almost alone among her family, understood that a true queen had to speak not just to foreign ambassadors, but to the hearts of her own people. She grew up amid beauty and fear, watching the waves break on the palace steps, hearing the news of fresh Roman demands, and sensing that one day her world would demand a price she could hardly imagine. The stage was set for one of history's greatest stories, a story of ambition, courage, love, and survival. But who would Cleopatra become? Would she repeat the mistakes of her ancestors, or would she find a new path, one that could save Egypt and perhaps even herself from oblivion? Chapter 2. Daughter of the Double Kingdom. What if your first lesson as a princess wasn't how to smile at a banquet, but how to survive a family where love and danger were always intertwined? For Cleopatra, every morning could bring a festival or a funeral. In Alexandria's palace, the walls had ears, and every shadow hid a secret. How do you grow up in a world where everyone's playing a deadly game, and you might be the prize? In the royal nursery, Cleopatra learned caution before she learned the alphabet. Her siblings, brothers and sisters, half and full, were both her playmates and her future rivals. She watched them closely, noticing who cried for attention, who whispered to the nurses, who listened at doors. Even as a small girl, Cleopatra developed the sharp instincts that would later save her life. Her father, Ptolemy XII, known behind his back as Auletes, or the flute player, was charming, extravagant, and anxious. He loved music and lavish displays, but he loved his throne more. Cleopatra saw him negotiate with Roman envoys, promising gold, grain, even temples in exchange for their support. She watched as he banished his own daughters, executed advisors, and changed alliances as quickly as he changed his robe. In her father's eyes, Cleopatra glimpsed both the joy of power and its terrible cost. Would she inherit his gifts or his fears? Cleopatra's mother, likely Cleopatra V Tryphena, though even this is debated, was a shadowy figure, absent from most records, perhaps dead or exiled before Cleopatra's 10th birthday. Instead, the young princess was surrounded by nurses, tutors, and foreign visitors. She learned Greek at her father's knee, Egyptian from the palace servants, Latin from the Roman ambassadors, and Aramaic and Hebrew from the cosmopolitan streets. By her teenage years, Cleopatra could converse in at least 7 languages, a skill no other Ptolemy had bothered to master. In the palace schoolrooms, Cleopatra found solace and escape. She devoured scrolls of Homer, Sappho, and Herodotus, but also the ancient tales of Isis and Osiris, stories that tied her to Egypt's distant past. She studied geometry, astronomy, and medicine. She listened to lectures on law and government and learned to debate fiercely, often out-arguing her tutors. Her teachers, impressed and perhaps a little afraid, called her a prodigy. But education was only part of her training. Cleopatra watched the palace's ever-shifting alliances, who dined with whom, who bribed the guards, who left the city quietly in the night. She learned the art of reading faces, of saying one thing while meaning another, of surviving in a world where yesterday's friend might be tomorrow's assassin. Could she trust anyone, ever? Or would every relationship become a test of loyalty and cunning? Even outside the palace, dangers was never far away. Alexandria was a city of beauty and violence. Its marble columns and mosaic floors gleamed in the sun, but riots could erupt over attacks, a religious slight, or even a whispered insult. The city's markets thrived on gossip as much as gold. In the back streets, revolutionaries and prophets preached against the foreign kings. Cleopatra, always curious, sometimes slipped out in disguise with a few loyal guards to listen to her people, tasting street food, watching processions, learning the language of the crowd. What did she hear? Mostly discontent. Egyptians who felt ignored by their rulers, Greeks who feared the growing power of Rome, Jews and Syrians all struggling to make their voices heard in a city that belonged to everyone and no one. As she grew, so did the shadow of Rome. In her childhood, Cleopatra saw Roman generals, some arrogant, some charming, arrive with ships and soldiers, making demands of her father. She listened as palace counselors debated how much grain to send, how much gold to offer, whether to defy or flatter the world's new masters. Even then, Cleopatra sensed the game had changed. Survival no longer depended only on family intrigue, but on understanding the ambitions of a foreign power that could destroy Egypt with a word. Yet, in the candlelit corners of the palace library, Cleopatra dreamed not only of survival, but of greatness. She read stories of Alexander, who had founded her city and conquered half the known world before dying younger than most men begin. She pored over records of earlier queens, Arsinoe II, who had co-ruled Egypt, and Berenice II, who had dared to wage war. Cleopatra wondered, could she, too, leave a mark that would last? The answer was closer than she knew. Chapter 3. Storm over Alexandria. What if the only way to survive your own family was to outwit them at every turn? Imagine waking each day to whispers in the hallways, rumors of poison in your cup, and servants who bow to you in the morning but spy for your brother at night. For Cleopatra, growing up royal was never safe. The closer she got to the throne, the greater the danger became. Could she win a crown without losing herself? Or would she pay the ultimate price for ambition? By her teens, Cleopatra had learned that palace affection could change in a heartbeat. Her siblings, especially her younger brother Ptolemy XIII and sister Arsinoe, were no longer just childhood rivals, but deadly threats. In Alexandria, the rumor mill never slept. Every day brought new accusations, alliances, and betrayals. Was the nurse on her father's payroll or her uncle's? Was her favorite tutor honest, or reporting every lesson to the regent's spies? Cleopatra grew used to uncertainty, mastering the art of quiet watchfulness. When her father, Ptolemy XII, died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra was just 18. In his will, he named her and her 10-year-old brother co-rulers, a common Ptolemaic arrangement, but one destined for conflict. Technically, the siblings were to marry and rule together, as the tradition of the dynasty required. In reality, Ptolemy XIII's advisors, men like the ruthless eunuch Pothinus and the ambitious general Achillas, had other plans. They saw Cleopatra's intelligence and independence as threats to their own ambitions. Would she submit, or would she fight for real power in a world built for men? At first, Cleopatra tried to work with her brother and his advisors, hosting joint audiences, appearing together at public ceremonies, and offering generous positions at court. But her willingness to speak directly to the people, her refusal to hide her opinions, and her popularity with the Egyptian priesthood set her apart and made her dangerous. Soon, official documents dropped her face and name, recognizing only Ptolemy XIII. In the palace, whispers grew louder. Cleopatra was too ambitious, too outspoken, too close to the people. It wasn't long before she was effectively under house arrest. Her food and movements watched, her letters intercepted, her loyalists dismissed or bribed away. Sensing danger, Cleopatra made a daring decision. Late one night, with the help of a handful of trusted servants, she slipped out of the palace disguised as a servant, traveling by boat into the Nile Delta, then to the borderlands near Syria. Exile was bitter, but she knew it was better than a quiet death at the hands of those who wanted her gone. But how does a teenage queen, cut off from her city and her power, survive in a world that values her only as a symbol or a pawn? Cleopatra's exile was a lesson in both loss and grit. Far from Alexandria's luxury, she lived among Egyptian and Greek exiles, gathering supporters and resources where she could. She wrote letters to foreign allies, bribed mercenaries, and sent messages to loyal priests and officials still in Egypt. She practiced the ancient rituals of Isis and Osiris, showing herself as a true Egyptian in a way her brother and his advisors never could. Could she turn her hardship into strength? Or would she be forgotten, like so many deposed royals before her? Meanwhile, back in Alexandria, chaos brewed. Famine and unrest spread. The people grumbled about rising prices, greedy officials, and foreign overlords in Rome who now loomed larger than ever. The young Ptolemy's advisors made mistakes, taxing too harshly, offending priests, and failing to calm the city's restlessness. Whispers of rebellion echoed through the marketplace. Even the gods, some said, had turned their faces away. And then, as if the gods themselves had decided to intervene, fate brought the greatest power in the world to Alexandria's shores. Julius Caesar, Rome's most ambitious general, arrived, chasing his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean. Pompey, hoping for sanctuary, was betrayed and murdered on the beach by Ptolemy's men. The world shuddered. Rome had long memories and little patience for insult. Cleopatra saw her chance. With Caesar in Alexandria, a new power had arrived, one that could break the deadlock or destroy everyone in its path. The city teetered on the edge of civil war. Caesar summoned both Ptolemy and Cleopatra, demanding that the siblings resolve their dispute in his presence. But how could Cleopatra, barred from the palace, even get to him without being killed on the way? What happened next would become the stuff of legend. A plan was hatched, a rug, a loyal servant, and the kind of theatrical gamble only a queen with nothing to lose could try. Would Cleopatra's next move save her, or become her most famous failure? Chapter 4. The Queen and the Conqueror. What if your only hope of survival was to trust a foreign conqueror who could just as easily destroy you as save you? Cleopatra's fate and Egypt's now rested on one impossible gamble. Would her greatest rival also become her greatest ally? The next move had to be perfect, or it would be her last. The streets of Alexandria were thick with tension. Roman soldiers patrolled the palace gates, the people whispered about omens, and the air crackled with rumors of war. Julius Caesar had come not as a friend, but as a victor, chasing the ghost of Pompey, demanding tribute, and making it clear that Egypt's future was now in his hands. The city, wounded and anxious, watched for any sign of what would come next. Caesar demanded both Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra appear before him to settle their dispute. But for Cleopatra, it was nearly impossible. Her enemies watched every gate and alley, ready to seize or kill her if she set foot in the palace. Her loyalists and a handful of trusted servants devised a plan that would take nerves of steel, perfect timing, and just a touch of theater. Could Cleopatra turn a desperate gamble into the scene that would make her legend? The story has been told 100 ways, each more dramatic than the last, but beneath the legend is a reality far more dangerous. In the darkness before dawn, Cleopatra disguised herself as a humble servant, her royal jewels hidden, her hair wrapped beneath a simple scarf. She was smuggled through the city's winding streets, avoiding guards and spies, then rowed quietly across the moonlit harbor in a small fishing boat. Waiting at the palace walls, Cleopatra's most loyal servant, sometimes named Apollodorus, sometimes simply the Sicilian, prepared the final audacious step. He rolled the queen into a thick carpet, or in some tales a linen sack, hoisted the heavy bundle onto his back, and carried her past the Roman sentries who never imagined the greatest queen in the world could travel in such humble disguise. The palace was ablaze with torchlight, echoing with the sharp voices of Roman guards and Egyptian courtiers alike. Apollodorus, sweating with effort but smiling coolly, bowed before Caesar and announced he bore a special gift. Caesar, always curious, nodded for the bundle to be unwrapped. The carpet unfurled, and out tumbled Cleopatra, dusty, breathless, radiant, and utterly unforgettable. In that moment, she was not just a princess in exile, but a queen claiming her destiny. Caesar, startled at first, laughed with admiration at the audacity. The Roman conqueror had met his match in daring and in wit. But would Caesar become her savior or her new master? Could Cleopatra, barely 20, outmaneuver the most ruthless politician in the world? Their alliance would shape the fate of 2 empires, But first, it had to survive the jealousies, plots, and open war swirling in Alexandria's palace. Cleopatra was ready. She spoke to Caesar not as a supplicant, but as an equal. Fluent in Latin and Greek, she dazzled him with stories of Egypt's grandeur, her knowledge of science, philosophy, and religion, and her vision for a revived kingdom that could serve both Rome and its own people. She didn't beg, she negotiated. She made clear she would be more valuable as an ally than as a victim. Caesar, famously ambitious and rarely sentimental, saw more than just beauty. He saw a partner who could help him cement Rome's influence in the East and deliver Egypt's wealth to his cause. Their alliance was sealed not just in whispered strategy, but, as the city soon learned, in intimacy as well. The two became lovers, though for both the relationship was always laced with calculation and mutual benefit. But the walls of the palace were thin. Word spread quickly, and Alexandria erupted. Ptolemy XIII's supporters raged at the humiliation of a foreign queen and a Roman tyrant taking power. Riots broke out. The city burned. Roman troops fought Egyptian loyalists in the streets. In the confusion, Cleopatra's younger sister Arsinoe escaped the palace, rallying rebels to her banner and laying siege to the royal court itself. Could Cleopatra and Caesar hold their alliance and the city against betrayal and open war? Or would their victory turn to ash before it had truly begun? With the palace under siege and food running low, the situation became desperate. Caesar, trapped by rebels and outnumbered, sent for reinforcements. Cleopatra, refusing to give up, moved through the besieged corridors, inspiring both Romans and Egyptians with her composure and resolve. At last, Roman reinforcements arrived by sea. In fierce fighting, the rebels were defeated. Ptolemy XIII tried to flee but drowned in the Nile. Arsinoe, the last challenger, was captured and sent to Rome in chains. Cleopatra had survived the storm, and at Caesar's side emerged as Egypt's sole ruler. But peace was not yet hers. In the months to come, she would have to rebuild a shattered city, win over a suspicious people, and secure her future in a world that would never forgive a woman who dared to rule. And in the shadows, even greater dangers were gathering, both within Egypt and far across the sea in Rome. Chapter 5. Queen Reborn. What if victory was only the beginning? For Cleopatra, survival meant more than escaping the palace alive. Could she transform from a puppet queen, barely tolerated by Rome, into the most powerful and beloved ruler Egypt had seen in centuries? In the ashes of civil war, Cleopatra would find out if she had the strength not just to seize power, but to hold it. The fires that swept Alexandria left scars that would last for years. Temples and warehouses were destroyed. Priceless scrolls vanished from the library. Food was scarce, and the city's famous harbors lay half empty, trade strangled by months of siege. Cleopatra, just 21, looked out from the battered palace and knew her real work was only beginning. She acted swiftly. First, she moved to restore peace and order. She offered amnesty to many who had supported Ptolemy, inviting them to return to the city, if they pledged loyalty. She met with priests and temple leaders, promising to rebuild shrines and fund new religious festivals. To ordinary Egyptians, she made bold gestures, handing out grain, canceling some taxes, and organizing public celebrations of victory. Could she win over a city that had just months before screamed for her blood? She would not rest until she tried. But Cleopatra knew that Roman eyes watched her every move. Julius Caesar, now her lover and political ally, remained in Egypt for several months, settling the government, training loyal troops, and enjoying the pleasures of Alexandria. Their partnership was more than romance. It was strategy. Cleopatra needed Caesar's protection. Caesar needed Egypt's grain and wealth to feed Rome and his own ambitions. Soon, the partnership bore a son. Ptolemy 15, Philopator Philometor Caesar, known to history as Caesarion, Little Caesar. Cleopatra claimed publicly that Caesar was the father, making the boy both heir to Egypt and, potentially, a link to Rome's future. It was a dangerous claim, but a brilliant one. Would Caesar support his son, or would Rome see the boy as a threat? Cleopatra played her hand with care, balancing love, hope, and risk. She also began reshaping Egypt itself. Ancient rituals were revived. Statues of Cleopatra as both Greek queen and Egyptian pharaoh appeared across the land. She visited temples, dressed in the robes of Isis, and personally led religious ceremonies, astonishing both Egyptians, who had not seen a queen so devoted in centuries, and Greeks, who marveled at her confidence and charisma. Cleopatra's court became a hub of learning and culture again. Philosophers, mathematicians, poets, and artists returned to Alexandria, finding patronage and safety. The queen herself held salons, engaging in debate on philosophy, law, and science. She corresponded with scholars across the Mediterranean, commissioning studies and collecting rare books for the rebuilt library. What kind of ruler would she be? A restorer of lost glory, or a visionary forging a new Egypt? In truth, Cleopatra was both. Yet shadows lingered. The Roman Senate eyed her relationship with Caesar suspiciously. Some called her a temptress, a sorceress, a foreign queen bent on corrupting Rome's greatest man. Others whispered that her son could become a rival to Rome's own heirs. At home, old enemies waited for any sign of weakness. Her sister Arsinoe, still alive in Rome, ambitious courtiers in Alexandria, and the priesthood, always jealous of royal power. But Cleopatra thrived under pressure. She traveled up and down the Nile, appearing in Thebes, Memphis, and distant temple towns. She issued decrees in both Greek and Egyptian, hearing petitions from farmers and nobles alike. Her reputation for justice and generosity began to spread. Festivals once again lit the city, the markets filled with new trade. Even Rome's merchants, always pragmatic, praised the queen who had made Egypt safe and prosperous again. In 46 BCE, Caesar summoned Cleopatra to Rome. She arrived in grandeur, bringing Caesarion gifts and an entourage of diplomats, artists, and servants. Her presence set the city buzzing. Romans gawked at her style, her language, her self-assured grace. In public, Caesar dined openly with her. In private, he planned his own bid for power over all Rome. But even in Rome, Cleopatra was not safe. Jealousy, racism, and political fear swirled around her. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, everything changed overnight. Cleopatra, far from home and now at risk, made the hardest choice: return to Egypt, save her son, and prepare for a new age of danger, where Rome's ambitions and Egypt's fate would become more entangled than ever before. Chapter 6. Between Two Worlds. What if, after every victory, you had to start again? Imagine crossing the sea with your child and a crown, knowing your strongest protector has been murdered, and every new day could bring either alliance or assassination. Cleopatra was no stranger to danger, but now She would have to hold Egypt's future in her hands with nothing but her wits and will. Would she bend to Rome's chaos or make chaos work for her? Cleopatra's return to Alexandria was bittersweet. The great city welcomed her with torches, processions, and the music of 1,000 harps. But behind the celebration lay uncertainty. The news of Julius Caesar's death in the Senate had sent shock waves through the world. Rome was once again at war with itself, and Egypt, prosperous, coveted, vulnerable, was more exposed than ever. Caesarion, her son, and Egypt's future became both a symbol of hope and a target for conspiracy. Cleopatra surrounded him with tutors, guards, and wise advisers. She watched over him fiercely, knowing Rome would never forget a boy who carried both the blood of the Ptolemies and, possibly, of Caesar himself. But ruling Egypt now demanded more than cleverness or charm. Cleopatra worked day and night to maintain the fragile prosperity she'd rebuilt. She secured Egypt's borders, strengthened the army, and expanded her spies and diplomats across the eastern Mediterranean. Grain flowed steadily to Rome, and with it, bribes, letters, and quiet promises to any Roman leader who might help Egypt survive the coming storm. But how do you choose allies in a world where yesterday's friend is tomorrow's enemy? For Cleopatra, there was no escape from Roman politics. Her every move would have consequences for her people, her son, and her own life. Rome tore itself apart. Mark Antony, Caesar's friend and loyal general, clashed with Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir. The Senate shifted alliances, armies marched, and cities burned. Cleopatra watched from afar, reading coded reports, weighing her options. She knew Antony, his ambition, his love of spectacle and pleasure, his appetite for both power and passion. She also knew Octavian, cold, calculating, ruthless. When Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus in Cilicia, modern Turkey, to answer for her loyalty, the moment became a test of everything she had learned. Most would have come fearful, begging for forgiveness. Cleopatra came as a goddess. She sailed up the river Cydnus in a barge draped with gold and silver, perfumed with incense and roses, dressed as Isis herself. Musicians played, servants fanned the queen, and the people flocked to the riverbanks in awe. Even Antony, famed for his arrogance and will, was left speechless by the spectacle. Was this seduction, diplomacy, or both? Cleopatra knew the answer didn't matter. Only the outcome did. Would Antony be her protector, her partner, or her conqueror? This meeting would decide the fate of Egypt, and perhaps the fate of the world. At the banquet that followed, Cleopatra matched Antony's wit, charm, and revelry. They drank together, swapped stories, and tested each other's resolve. It became clear to both that they needed one another. Antony sought Egypt's wealth and support for his ambitions in the east. Cleopatra needed his protection and power to safeguard her throne and son. Their alliance was sealed, not just in words, but in passion. Together, they embarked on a partnership that would echo through history, a blend of love, politics, and shared ambition that left the world's most powerful men and women scrambling to keep up. For a time, their alliance flourished. Cleopatra and Antony lived and ruled together in Alexandria, hosting legendary feasts, launching joint expeditions, and blending the best of Greek and Egyptian culture. They founded new cities, supported the arts, and made gifts to temples across Egypt and beyond. The people marveled at their rulers' boldness and generosity. The world's poets and satirists wrote endlessly of their love. But trouble brewed on the horizon. In Rome, Octavian spread rumors of excess, and treason. The Senate accused Antony of abandoning Roman values for Eastern decadence. Cleopatra became a scapegoat for every anxiety about power, gender, and foreign influence. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide not only the fate of Egypt, but the fate of Rome itself. Would Cleopatra's alliance with Antony be enough to withstand Rome's wrath? Or would their love story become the tragedy that ended the world's oldest kingdom? In the next chapter, the lovers face war, betrayal, and the ultimate test of everything they've built together. Chapter 7. The Last Stand. What if you could see disaster coming and still couldn't change your fate? Imagine standing at the height of power, wealthy, adored, in love, knowing the whole world is turning against you. For Cleopatra and Antony, the final act was set in motion. Would they fight for their dream until the end, or would the dream itself destroy them? It started, as such things do, with rumors and letters, insults flying between Rome and Alexandria, wild stories about Cleopatra's influence, Antony's supposed madness, their exotic court, and the threat they posed to Roman order. In the Senate, Octavian accused Antony of betraying Rome for an Egyptian queen. Antony, in turn, denounced Octavian as a liar and a usurper. Both sides knew that words were just the beginning. The world's greatest armies gathered. In Greece, off the coast of Actium, Antony and Cleopatra mustered their fleet, hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers, the hope of the East against the power of the West. Antony was still a master of war, but his position was weak. His allies wavered, his generals argued, and his men grumbled about supplies. Cleopatra brought her own fleet, her own wealth, and her own loyalty. Together they hoped they could win against all odds. But what is loyalty when fear is stronger? On the eve of battle, desertion spread. Roman soldiers defected, ships fled, and trusted friends offered secret bargains to Octavian. Cleopatra and Antony clung to each other, determined to hold their line, but even their love could not control the winds of fate. The Battle of Actium began with hope. A morning haze, a sunlit sea, the flutter of banners. Cleopatra watched from her flagship, veiled in white, calm and regal. Antony rode among his captains, his voice ringing with bravado, his heart aching with doubt. Octavian's fleet was smaller but better supplied and led by the ruthless general Agrippa. As the day wore on, chaos spread across the water. Oars splintered, ships caught fire, and the sound of clashing steel echoed from horizon to horizon. Suddenly, in the midst of the storm, Cleopatra's ships broke formation. Some called it panic, others a planned retreat. Cleopatra, seeing the battle lost, ordered her fleet to turn south and flee. Antony saw her sails departing and, in a moment that would become legend, abandoned the fight to follow her. Some said love conquered reason. Others whispered that both knew all was lost and chose each other above all else. Was it cowardice or the final proof of their devotion? History would never agree. But the war was over. Octavian's legion swept across Greece and into Egypt, unstoppable as the tides. Back in Alexandria, defeat became a shadow over every heart. The city, once vibrant and bold, now waited for the conqueror's hand. Antony grew gaunt and desperate, brooding in his palace, haunted by dreams of lost glory. Cleopatra, ever the queen, did not abandon hope. She made overtures to Octavian, offering peace, gold, even the crown. Octavian answered only with demands for unconditional surrender. The lovers planned a final defense, calling loyalists to the cause, fortifying the palace, and preparing for the last siege. Antony, betrayed by old friends and cornered by fate, chose to die on his own terms. In a dramatic final act, he fell on his sword, dying in Cleopatra's arms, one last gesture of love and pride. Now, alone and besieged, Cleopatra faced the end. Would she march in chains through Rome as a trophy for Octavian? Or would she claim the last victory, her freedom and her dignity, on her own terms? She chose the legend. In her mausoleum, surrounded by her loyal servants dressed in royal finery and bearing the crown of Egypt, Cleopatra summoned a deadly asp, an Egyptian cobra, symbol of the goddess Wadjet. One bite, and the queen who had dared to challenge the world slipped away, her secrets intact. Octavian entered the city to find the queen dead, the palace quiet, and the dynasty of the pharaohs ended. Egypt, for the first time in millennia, became just another province in a foreign empire. The treasures of Alexandria were plundered, its temples fell silent, and Caesarion, Cleopatra's son and heir, was hunted down and killed, ending the line of Egypt's ancient kings forever. But Cleopatra's story refused to die. Across the world, poets sang of her beauty, her courage, her tragedy. In Rome, she became a cautionary tale and a forbidden dream. For centuries, her legend would grow, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as a hope, always as a mystery. What was the true cost of loving too boldly, dreaming too fiercely, or daring to be a queen in a world built for conquerors? Cleopatra's answer was her life, and a legacy that would outlive every empire that claimed to defeat her. Chapter 8. Echoes of a Queen. What if the end of a life was just the beginning of a legend? As Cleopatra's spirit left her body, her city mourned, and the world began to spin new stories, each one more fantastical than the last. How do you bury a queen whose memory refuses to stay silent? How does a city, a people, and a civilization learn to live in the shadow of a vanished crown? Alexandria awoke in mourning. The people crept to the palace gates, waiting for news, fearing the worst. The streets, once filled with festival lights and processions, now lay shrouded in silence. The word spread like wildfire. Cleopatra was dead. Egypt had fallen. For some, the grief was mixed with fear. What would Rome do now? Would Alexandria's temples be looted, its scholars silenced, its people reduced to slaves and exiles? Others, weary from years of uncertainty and war, accepted the end with resignation, a final sigh for a lost golden age. But even among the most broken, the memory of Cleopatra lived. She had given them spectacle and hope, wisdom and wit, music and defiance. Her image lingered everywhere, painted on temple walls, carved in marble, remembered in the scent of lotus and myrrh that floated from the palace gardens. But what happens to a legend when enemies controlled the story? Octavian, soon to become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, ordered the treasures of Egypt seized and sent to Rome. Cleopatra's monuments and portraits were defaced, her name chiseled from stelae, her image erased from coins and reliefs. In official histories, she was painted as a dangerous seductress, an enemy of Rome, a woman whose ambition brought down kings. Her final acts were described as cowardice or hysteria, not courage or genius. The truth, as always, lay somewhere between the silence and the screams. Yet even Rome could not control memory. In Alexandria's taverns, old soldiers and servants whispered tales of the queen who defied the world. In hidden shrines, Priestesses sang hymns to Isis and dared to invoke Cleopatra's name. Travelers wrote home about her intelligence, her elegance, her laughter. Her enemies had won the battle, but lost the war for hearts and minds. What became of Alexandria? The city survived, though it changed forever. Roman officials replaced Ptolemaic princes. New temples rose to honor Roman gods alongside the old. The library, damaged by war and neglect, faded as the empire grew. Yet Alexandria remained a crossroads of learning and trade, its streets filled with the voices of Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, Romans, and every people under the sun. In time, new philosophers and saints, rebels and rulers would walk the marble colonnades, dreaming of the past and shaping the future. For Egypt itself, the centuries grew harder. Taxes and tribute fed Rome's insatiable hunger. The old gods lingered but slowly faded, replaced by new faiths from the east and west. The language changed, the ancient rites vanished, and the last priestess of Isis wept as the last temple was closed. Egypt became a memory within a memory, a place of wonder, legend, and loss. But what became of Cleopatra's memory? In Rome, her name was both a curse and a fascination. Writers like Plutarch and Dio Cassius retold her story, each adding new details, some true, many invented. Poets and painters, centuries later, would remake her as both temptress and heroine. Shakespeare gave her immortal words, Hollywood gave her unforgettable faces, and the world's dreamers gave her 1,000 new stories. To some, she was a warning, the queen who lost herself in love and paid the price. To others, she was the ultimate survivor, clever, daring, unbroken until the end. And to millions, she remained a mystery. The woman whose tomb was never found, whose real face is still hidden, whose life still raises more questions than answers. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps Cleopatra's greatest victory was not in life, but in the power of her story. A tale that refuses to be buried, that rises again in every generation, daring us to imagine, to mourn, and to hope.